Hello, everyone. Well, it's a little over 3 weeks since we saw each other last. The conclusion of book 1 of the Orphan's Tales live quarantine reading series. Are we still under quarantine? Yes, sort of. A lot of people seem to have just given up because it's hard. But a lot of us are still under rules. Getting into phase 2, some of us still in phase 1, most of us dealing with the fact that half of the country has just decided it doesn't matter anymore. And then on top of that, everything else is on fire, which is why we put off for some time continuing this series. There were more important things to be talking about. There still are more important things to be talking about, but I think we all need a little distraction, which was the point of this series to begin with, to provide something positive and regular to focus on. So here we are again. I think I had not really realized that this was keeping me going way more than my heart or my head was counting on. That just having somewhere to be and having to, not look like a monster, and, someone to smile at, and all of it, I think was keeping me above water in a way I had not anticipated. So I'm glad to be back here as well. I hope you guys are too. I hope everyone is doing as well as possible and staying as safe as possible in all ways that, all the ways you can. And that if you are out there protesting, you're taking all the precautions that you should be to come back safe to fight another day. And thank you if you are out doing those things. The world is a strange place at the moment, but it is good to see some familiar names in the feed and this wall. It seems like both yesterday and 1,000 years ago that I did this last. It's such a strange thing that we created here at such a strange time. Everything about it is like both bizarre and familiar. So I'm glad to see some of you again. Hopefully. I didn't really advertise that much today because I was busy with the baby and kind of feeling down. So hopefully, we'll do better at it next week. But today we're going to start book 2, which is In the Cities of Coin and Spice. Different cover artist. This is Michael Whelan doing the cover art. Same interior artist, Michael Kaluta. The Book of Michaels. Yeah, I do actually know why they changed artists, but I think it's probably, it's kind of juicy too, but I think that is something I probably shouldn't put on the internet, since both people are still working artists. But ask me at a convention and I'll tell you why the cover art changed between the books. Yeah, so, as always, the smiles and the fairy tales cover up that I'm very well aware of how difficult the world is being to itself, in itself right now. And sometimes I feel guilty and strange about writing these kinds of books during this time, about taking up any sort of room in the room. But I'm doing what I can do, doing my best. And there are stories in this one that are really very relevant to some of the things happening right now. A lot was happening when I was writing these books as well. The whole run-up to the Iraq War was happening, and there's a lot of turmoil and injustice and protests, and I was out in the streets doing it then. It was a different time, but not that different. So let's do the intro again. Let's see if I remember this. The fact that my mother-in-law can do an impression of me doing this should tell you how many times it's been heard around here. So, for legal reasons, as always, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. I do not have the rights to the audiobook of The Orphan's Tales, and probably never will at this point. So, for all legal purposes, this is a play. This is a one-woman show. You can, I don't remember any of this really, so you can buy copies of this at your local independent bookseller, most of whom are still closed because this will never end. If you'd like to support my local independent bookseller, that is printbookstore.com. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com, and next Sunday we'll start with music as we usually do. I didn't want to have any spoilers, and her songs are usually full of little bits of spoilers. What comes next? You can catch up in the archive with all of book 1 in the Night Garden, and every week I will back up these recordings to the archive as well. The archive is at my YouTube channel, which is Cat Valente Live on the YouTubes. You can find me at Twitter at Cat Valente. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valente as well, where there are lots of exciting goodies this month and every other month. You can put a tip in the tip jar on my Instagram profile, as well as my website, which is CatherynneMValente.com, and my YouTube profile. Many links. These are free readings. You absolutely do not have to tip anything. However, everything is crazy broken garbage in not just the world and life, but my bank account. So anything that you would like to toss into the witch's hat is deeply appreciated, and I will thank anyone who did on the next stream. Have I forgotten anything? Probably. So lipstick. The lipstick, this time I got new special lipstick for tonight, but as I said, I am broke, so it's NYX, which is a nice $3 lipstick in Sao Paulo. So I know that my lipstick became kind of a meme last time, so when I wear new ones, I will continue to tell you what they are. So I wrote this. I mean, I started it right after really finishing the first Orphan's Tales book, so I would have written it between 2004, beginning of 2005, on through to let's say the end of 2005, and there is a lot in it that is sort of coded bits of my own life and experience, and the stuff I was going through and the stuff the world was going through. It is both darker and lighter than the first book. I talked about how, I thought I was real deep because I was young and I didn't know anything. These are all kind of elementally themed. So the first two were, the Book of the Steppe and the Book of the Sea, which is obviously earth and water. This will start with air and end with fire. Again, super deep, just very unique, and no one's ever done it before. But, it mattered a lot to me at the time. There is just so much life in this book, and I'm sure it will feel the same as we go through this week by week. And that is the plan, to do a longer reading each week, Sunday night at 8:30, rather than doing them every night, which really was a lot. We might even increase it to twice a week, but I really wouldn't want to do more than that again. I think it both was keeping me going, and I haven't worn makeup since the last reading. Putting myself together for these and getting my heart together enough to do a good reading for you guys is a lot every night. So hopefully this will be a little more sustainable. It will certainly take us longer at this rate than 44 nights to finish this book, which is, I think, it's just slightly longer, 50 pages longer than the previous one. Okay, well, let's get started, and we can get started with an awesome illustration here, one of Michael Kaluta's full-page ones of the garden full of autumnal bats and other awesomeness. And whenever I sign this book, unless it's somebody I know and it's something personal, I always sign it, "No true tale ever ends." And I think that's something to keep in mind, both good and bad. The things that we're fighting for now, the story of the fight for them will never end, and you can't ever let your guard down. The fight doesn't end. The fight goes on, and that's terrifying because we want it to end and to just be happy. But everything worth fighting for, you have to fight for forever. But also, if you're fighting, you're alive. If you're fighting, you get through another day. So, here's to the fight. The Orphan's Tales, Volume 2, In the Cities of Coin and Spice, by some chick named Cat. So the first book was dedicated to Sarah, who, when she was very small, wanted a garden. The second book is for Sarah, who, when she was older, wanted the world. The Book of the Storm. In the garden. The paths of the garden were wet with fallen apples and red with their ruptured skin. Rag-clothed winds trailed over grass blanched of green. Scarlet swallowed up the thrashing trees until all the many groves stood in long rows like bouquets of bloody flowers with long black stalks. It was the girl's favorite time. Food was never so easy to find, and the air was filled all through day and night with the flapping and fluttering of wings as crows circled south and geese fled even farther into the warm belly of the world. In the autumn, her skirt was always full of pomegranates and grackle eggs, and though the air was colder, the leaves' color did not lie, and they warmed her like a fire beneath a squat iron pot. It was from the blazing boughs of a cinnamon tree, that she saw through the high windows of the women's quarters in the palace. Her palms were henna-dusted by the perfumed bark, and she sucked the last of the morning's golden yolk from her fingers, now flavored with spice. She kept well behind the skein of leaves as she looked through the arched window at the woman sitting within, her back straight as an axe handle, and so still, though hands flashed over her, and voices clicked and hushed in her pretty ears. A dozen maids held the woman's long black hair over top. A dozen maids held the woman's long black hair out taut, and slowly, with infinite patience, threaded tiny white pearls onto the inky strands, one by one, as though the woman were a necklace in a jeweler's workshop. Dinarzade was to be wed. Surely one or two of the Sultan's daughters were married every year, and the girl paid them much less attention than she did the family of doves that returned to the same birch trees each spring. But she could not help knowing of this one. Gardener and groundskeeper talked of nothing else. Flowers were coaxed and coddled long past their blooming, trees trained to canopies, fruits culled in great piles, like many-colored snowdrifts, and sent wagon by wagon to the kitchens, only to return to the courtyard as pies and pastries and jams and cakes. For Dinarzade wished to be married in the garden. It was unseemly to be married without a roof over one's head, but she had insisted, and even wept. And finally it was decided that a roof of trees is not different in its nature from a roof of wood, and the delicate copse of chestnuts before the great courtyard had had their branches lashed and tied and dragged into the shape of a small, narrow chapel. As they climbed their ladders to wheel and prune the trees into holiness, the gardeners grumbled to the girl that she ought to be especially careful not to be seen, since the palace was leaking out of its walls for the pleasure of a spoilt Emira. In her deep blue cushions, Dinarzade stared into the mirror as she was strung with pearls for the engagement feast, implacable, canvas blank, and the girl stared into the princess. Still as an owl, she watched the women whose hands were full of white jewels, watched the decorated Dinarzade like a tall mirror until the pearl keepers led their charge away down the stone stairs, her hair trailing behind her like a shred of sky glittering with stars. The girl touched her own hair without meaning to, hair no less black than the other woman's, but tangled and strung through with hazel husks instead. Below her, the tree shook suddenly. She was shaken from her contemplation of Dinarzade's unmovable face. She glanced down to the apple-smattered path and saw the boy staring up at her. He grinned sidelong, but his mouth was tired at the edges, like a slice of orange beginning to brown. She scrambled lightly down the trunk and gave him a smile small as a secret. The boy was dressed for the feast, and obviously uncomfortable in stiff gold fabric and green silks, uncomfortable especially with the thin band of porphyry circling his wrist, which marked him to anyone who cared for such codes as the heir to the Sultanate. The girl did not care, but she allowed that it was a lovely shade of purple. How did you get away? She asked softly. Surely everyone will want to squeeze your arms and tell you what a fine man you're growing up to be. The boy snorted like a half-grown bull. At a wedding, the girl on the dais is the only thing anyone cares to squeeze. It's the same at every dinner until the wedding. Who's marrying her? She did not want to be interested. She told herself she was not. How should I know? He kicked at a rotten apple near his slippered toe. Some prince or soldier, or prince who was a soldier who became a prince. I can't even remember their names. They all came with chests of opals and baskets of trained songbirds tied together by ribbons of her favorite color, and mechanical golden roosters that crowed when you wound their tails. I did rather like that one. Someone chose, though I'm sure it wasn't her. I do know she's not to be his first wife. He has 2 already, but no children at all. He must have brought something very nice in his barrels. I don't know. He wasn't the one with the roosters. The boy frowned into the wind and scratched at his collar. I have to dress like a doll just to watch her eat, he mumbled. And this thing has no pockets at all. I can't even bring you anything. That was never necessary, you know, the girl demurred. I have enough. I always have enough. Even if my enough and yours are as different as an elephant and a minaret. Her black-rimmed eyes flickered to the earth and back to the boy, and she took him gently by the hand, away from the open paths and into the interior gardens, past the marble benches and fountains, past the overpicked orchards and the overpressed grapevines to a clutch of stones so thick with moss they seemed to be the bodies of long-dead tigers or leopards, whose fur still grew and grew after they had perished. In their long shadows the children were spared the winds, though the girl breathed into her hands to warm her bloodless fingers, and the boy's hands were soaked through with dew and old rain. But he did not seem to notice them. He was plucking at his rich vest and looking curiously at the girl. You know, he said shyly, I think I could bring you a dress. The girl laughed again. I have dozens of sisters with hundreds of dresses. They'd never notice one gone missing. I know it. It would be warm and softer than that old rag. The girl glanced at the frayed fabric that fashioned her skirt and shook her head. What would I do with a dress like theirs? You might as well sew my hair with pearls. No, if I am cold, I have blankets of leaves and my birds. I am not one of them. It would be silly to dress up a camel in lace and bells and jewels. You would do it only to laugh at the poor beast. They said nothing for a moment, and the boy was ashamed. But he saw the goose flesh on her shoulders and the bruised color of her frozen toes. The sky was deepening toward evening, gray and yellow against the wild colors of the garden, light slowly wandering away from the clouds, and he knew enough of proud young girls not to argue about the dress. Is there more? The boy finally blurted, fidgeting with his bracelet. Oh, yes, the girl laughed. There is always more. The girl leaned her head against the springy moss and closed her eyes, the stains on them showing full and dark as ever. She began to speak in a half-whisper, like a breath leaving a glass flute. I will tell you a story from the crease of my right eye. Once there was a long, lonely shore, gray as it is possible for gray to dream of. And the lonely shore ringed a lonely lake, whose water was black as it is possible for white to fear. And in this lake was a dim, wooded island, far off from the shore. There was a ramshackle dock on the shoals, and a ferry, little more than a raft of ash wood and a long pole, which was dragged back and forth through the silent water by a tall man in a coarse brown cloak. Or he might have been tall, if he were not afflicted with a stooping hunch, with which the cloak served to hide. To this ferry and this dock and this lake and this island and this long, lonely shore came a troubled young man who had but one thin and sallow-elbowed arm, and he was the 7th son of a 7th son, so naturally he was named 7. The tale of the crossing. The pebbled beach was wet and cold, each gray stone slick with rain and lake and mist. Nothing grew save a thin green mold at the water's edge. No sandpipers pecked at the shore for mites or worms. No cattails knocked against the bitter and scentless wind. 2 figures were black against the heavy woolen sky, which leaked a slow, sullen light like wrung sweat. The shapes were featureless save for their curved backs, the one hunched and bone-twisted, the other bent under his satchel. Slowly, the one approached the other, until from a distance there was but one great black shape, where the 2 men met and spoke. The younger man looked up at the ferryman, whose face was scored with lines like a constellation chart, though his eyes and hair were as black as though he had only been born a winter past. Even with his warped spine, he was still a massive creature, leaning against his saw-hewn pole and frowning at shadows moving on the brackish water. "If you want to cross, it'll have to be now, son. The storm comes through 3 times a day, and the last gale of the evening is due through sooner than you'd like to know." The young man frowned and reached into his sleeve with his right hand, but the left sleeve was empty. With his good fingers, he pulled a patched purse from the sleeve and clumsily extracted a single coin. He held it against the pad of his hand with a bitten thumb, held it as though it weighed heavier than iron. A small, pale coin, yellowed by many handlings, with a seal stamped onto it, something like a 7-pointed star writhing with spiders. He moved his thumb over it, sniffed the cold mist. He held it out to the ferryman, staring at him flatly, as though daring him to refuse. The ferryman did not reach for it. His eyes flickered from the boy's face to his empty sleeve, to his fare. Finally he sighed, a light, rasping sound like a bird's wings rubbing together. "I know what that is, boy." Seven snorted. "Is it enough, old man?" "It is worlds more than enough, and nowhere close to it, but I will take it." Seven slowly relinquished his coin, rubbing it again with his thumb before handing it over, and climbed onto the ferry, balancing himself as the boards adjusted to his weight. As he settled himself down, he glanced at the hulking figure pulling the pole from its anchor. The ferryman's shabby cloak shifted with his motions, and Seven thought he saw, only for a moment, of course, a green-black glint of claw flash in and out beneath the frayed fabric, which barely served to cover the man's chest. I've got an illustration of the coins here. Seven shook his head and called himself a fool of the fog, leaning back against the makeshift mast, whose sail was so torn and ruined that the ferryman had seemingly given up on it and lashed it to the shaft, useless as a 2-legged horse. The pole guided them smoothly through the vast lake, though it must have been very deep, and the staff seemed not at all equal to its work. For a time they sat in silence, pilot and passenger. Finally the ferryman swallowed thickly and spoke. "Where did you get that coin? It is not a thing you should own, a young thing like you." The lake slid around the pole like old oil. Seven chuckled, and his chuckle was not unlike his rasping cough. His stare was blank and tired. "I am not so young as all that." "The lake is wider than you think," the ferryman said. "The water warps the distance like a folded mirror. We have time together, you and I am neither mute nor deaf. I am called Idle by those who have gotten in the habit of calling me things, and I would know where a boy no grander or taller than a partridge farmer got a hold of Deheba." He spat the last word like a lump of tooth from his mouth, and it lay between them, glinting and garish. "Where does any man find money?" Seven sighed, looking out over the grey water and the tips of bare trees in the distance. Ask where an Ajan 3-piece comes from. The answer is obvious. Ask where Shaduki silver was minted. You've answered your own question in the asking. Ask after my Deheba. It must be plain what I will answer. I have been to the city of Marrow, and I have come out again. The Tale of the 12 Coins. My brothers were all grown, bull-broad and earnest as grass when I was born. I hardly knew them, but my mother held me to her breast as though she never had another son, as though 6 other mouths had not pulled at her, as though 12 other little red hands had not clutched at her hair. My father gave me a number instead of a name and returned to his cups. Of course, as a boy, I understood nothing but that my mother loved me and my father did not. My little heart could not begin to grasp that both her embraces and his wine-sopped silence were rooted in the same day, a day that sunk ahead of them like a pit in soft earth. I could not know that for 9 months they had prayed for a girl, eaten mashed snake innards, washed my mother's belly in hidden springs. But another son came, and my parents were always pilgrim pious and honest as ants. Among my people, a seventh son is a mark of grace. And grace must be answered. Grace must be paid for. On the boy's 7th birthday, he is laid out on the hillside, lashed to the earth by 5 white wood pegs and left to the favor of the stars. The 7th son pays for the 8th and the 9th and the 1st grandson and the 5th granddaughter. Fair trade, don't you think? 1 child for dozens, all lined up, waiting to be born, while that little boy lies on the mound, shivering in the rain. It is always done this way. And if any hut full of dirt farmers were to withhold the sky's dew, it would not have been mine. So my mother kissed me, and my father refused to look at me, and she had to tie me down all by herself, far off from our fields, her hands shaking as she put the stakes into the soft earth and knotted the ropes as tight as she dared. And I told her she didn't have to. We could tell everyone there'd been another son before me, stillborn, and that was good enough for the stars. 1 gray dead baby was good enough. I wasn't a 7th son at all. I was an 8th boy and a good boy. She didn't have to leave me there, where it was so dark and cold. She cried and she kissed my forehead for the last time, awkwardly lying over my splayed body, trying to hold me. Her tears rolled down my face onto my lips, and they were all the water I had. She told me that no one knew what happened to the 7th son. Maybe it was something wonderful. Maybe it was something special. But her eyes were dead, and I couldn't look at her while she lied. After a while she left, and I looked up into the stars, which I did not believe were alive. How could I? It's ridiculous. What sort of stars wanted boys to eat? Or if they did not want us for dinner, to pull their ox carts or pick their cherries, or whatever chores a star might have to do. The stars, the living stars, were children's stories, and I was no child. No one would do this to a child, so I must have been a man. And men are brave, even in the dark, even in the cold. I think I fell asleep. I must have, because I remember waking up, and the smell of burning lamps and burning grass was all around me, and there was light, a light already fading into a memory of silver. And my ropes were untied, lying limp on the grass beside me. I sat up and rubbed my numb, rain-soaked ankles and legs until painfully they prickled into life again, and I was able to stand. I did not make it to my feet. A great wind blew through the little valley, and it knocked me into the earth again. A wind so stiff and quick it slapped my eyes shut like snow-stuck windows, made them water behind the lids, whipped every drop of sweat from my skin until I was dry as a page. I could not open my eyes, I could not see, but hands seemed to clutch at me in the dark, tear at my clothes, carry me up into arms I could not begin to guess at. Dark moved through dark, and time passed without speaking to me. And though a man would not sleep at such a time, I woke with a raw throat and another child's arm flopped over my face. It was thin and bony, all elbow. As I swam up into myself, I realized I was lying over another body not less thin than the first. I looked up through a net of limbs, and beyond the limbs were thick bars of glass frosted over with ice. The wind had dwindled somewhat, much as a sirocco will dwindle into a sandstorm, but dwindle nonetheless. It curled and snapped through the cage and every angled limb. As I struggled up through the mass, some sleeping children moaned and turned over, some wakened ones moved to the side. All were nearly naked, clothed in scraps which might once have been suits and dresses, and none reached up to draw a rag over their nakedness, when my movement brushed the clothing aside. I reached the top of the pile of bodies. I thought there were about 20 of us there, shoved into the cage like stacked cow ribs, and peered out into a world of wreckage. Please be patient with me. I'm trying to describe a place you will never see. Wind-sprung tears streaked my face as I looked across a kind of central square. There were houses at its pale edges, fountains, even a bell tower, but I could see no wood or stone. Everything in the place was made of what the wind had managed to accumulate: paper and fish bones and the bodies of unfortunate birds, scraps of fur and broken plaster, and apple peels, lemon rinds, date seeds, old dresses, shoes without soles, soles without shoes, frayed rope and shattered pulleys. For most of the detritus of the city, most of the city of detritus, was paper. The fountain shot folios and scriptures and broadsheets into the air, and they were drafted by the gales into construction, endless pages sealed together as walls and stairs and peaked roofs by the unceasing wind. At the smallest break in the storm, I suspected the whole place would drift into nothing. The glass cage swung from an iron frame on a dais in the square. Canopies hung in patches over us, shredded cloth stretched through the frames, threads slipping almost to the ground. There were holes and rifts and cuts everywhere, but under their doubtful care the wind behaved like a willful infant, cowed but determined to get its own back the minute any back is turned. Folk moved over the rustling courtyard, poring over barrels and boxes and trays, tottering creatures with slender, wispy arms and legs, necks like those of swans curving up to heads high above their shoulders, and great distended bellies, swollen as a mother's mound on a woman already full of too much meat and wine. Occasionally one would peel a blown page from its spidery calves. The moon shone dully through the torn canopies like a bone through punctured skin. We were ignored in our cage, shivering, clutching each other in a blind search for warmth for hours. Sometime near dawn, I grabbed at an arm for purchase and heard the smallest of cries. And I saw her for the first time. A little older than I, but much thinner than a fawn at the bottom of winter's well, and she looked up at me with enormous black eyes, her dark hair cut roughly like a penitent's, close to her head, in uneven patches and bald spots. Her lips were pale, cracked as though she had not drunk water in days. Her tiny wrist twisted painfully in my hand. Her gaze slid to the wandering creatures in the square and back to me. I let her go as though she'd burned me. And she had burned me. Of course she had. Those black eyes had burned me as surely as a brand. I held out my hand to pull her up out of the well of legs and arms, but she shook her head and cringed back into them. I rested my head against her gingerly, and she coughed a little. These were the first times I touched her, and the first sounds I heard from her mouth. Finally, the sun came gray and dingy through the high and wind-worried clouds, and one of the long-necked things came sidling up to the dais. In one quick motion, it unlocked the door of the cage and stepped aside to avoid the pile of children that tumbled out. Soundlessly, it prodded us, squeezed us, and with a strength I would not have suspected, pulled us apart, sorting us onto either side of the dais, where others of the city's folk guided us into two shivering lines. The creature's skin was pale and silvery, as though water moved just beneath the surface. Its touch was cool and dry. We have an illustration here. I was relieved the girl had been sorted into the same line as I, which was much shorter than the second. We stood side by side, she and I, waiting. The children opposite us were tied together, wrist by wrist, with a rope paler than skin. They looked at us helplessly, teeth chattering, toes blue. Then their thin-armed guardian towered them over to our side and gave the lead to the last child in our line. It had to prod him roughly, and finally it just put the rope into his hand and closed his fingers around it. The creature who had opened the cage then took the hand of the child at the front of the line and led us all away. By instinct we locked hands together as if going to a picnic behind our mother's skirts. The girl squeezed my hand gently. We walked out of the courtyard and into the howl, through streets made of little more than rooster bones and petrified branches. It cracked under our feet, and the cracking was the only sound until we stopped before a tall edifice with a solid, well-made door set into rubbish walls. It might have been a church once, a basilica with tall towers. Now, like most of the architecture of the city, the factory, for that is what it was, I came to learn, was mostly paper. I could read many of the printed letters, but they folded into each other or thatched over each other to make an arcane gibberish. Here begins the book of clown, burglar, criminal prosperity to Marrow and all her market, closed by order of goat flesh. 2 portions for goblets unavailable in blue, yellow, red silk, measured by proprietor's arm, not customers. Wolf soup, hot and tasty. Carrot weight, thus was buried where once was a child whose face. Warning, sale of infested wheat, all wealth to the chrysoprase. Thieves will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. And on, it went around the lintel, over the walls like a frieze, parchment and vellum, plain paper and linen, white and gold and black and grey, and even scarlet, bright green mould glinting at angles. The children passed through the door, and it seemed so strange to me then that a real door should have been shoved into the pages here, but nowhere else. First the unbound, then the bound. The silence pressed down like piled stones on our shoulders. It was too much to bear. Just the last of the knotted ones passed over the threshold. I slipped my place in line, hauling the girl with me, and dashed out, down the steps, onto the wind-racked streets of bones and branches. One of the creatures caught us easily. They are so fast on those thready legs, like terrible ostriches. In a gale-shaded alley, it gripped me by the hair. It motioned back toward the factory and tried to guide us with its gaunt fingers. I stood my ground, and my friend moved closer to me. "Where are we?" I hissed, but my hiss was a shout in the hushed, empty alley. The thing looked startled. "You're not supposed to talk to me," it said haltingly. "We can't obey rules no one tells us about," I insisted. "You know now. Go inside, don't make trouble." "We shouldn't have to obey rules we haven't agreed to. You aren't our parents," the girl said. And thus I heard her voice for the first time. It was low and thick and firm as a forest floor. "She's right," I said. "Tell us where we are, and what is that place where you sent the others?" It stood, confused, looking from the door where its companions had already disappeared to the last of the children, to us, and back again. It rocked from one stilt-like leg to the other. "I'll be punished," it whined, finally. The girl rubbed her shaved skull. "Look," she said, "has any other child tried to talk to you?" "Never." "Then you can't really know you'll be punished." "But you'll certainly be punished if I scream and he runs off. If you tell us these things, we'll be good, and afterward we'll go where you want us to go. We promise." The thing took a deep breath and pulled its meager coat closer over its huge stomach. Its mouth was very wide, almost ear to ear, and strings of bluish hair tumbled down over its cheeks. It cleared its long throat. All right." The foreman's tale. "If it pleases you to know it, I am Vumim of Marrow, 3rd daughter of Orus, who was the grand niece of the 17th chrysoprase, which is how our rulers were titled in the days before the wasting. From the degenerated wealth of that long-dead personage, Orus, my benefactor, inherited an apple cart and a fetish stand. In my turn, I took proprietorship of these things and added to them a meat pit. Among wealth, I was not wealthy, but beyond the rolls of the Assad, the great market, I would be envied for the gold at my throat and the silk at my feet. So were we all, envied and envying in the glory of Marrow that was. When I was a child, the Assad was the heart of my heart, and in this I was not unique. How high its canopies flew! How bright those draping oranges, those greens, those deep blues! Frankincense bubbled thick and brown in high-rimmed cauldrons. Black-faced sheep babbled in their pens. Gold was measured into black purses, great and small. How sweet was the sound of the creaking cartwheels, the sound of bartering, the sound of coins solid in the palm. The blessed sky over the Assad was always blue, the polished stones of the square ever shining. For my own part, I was eager to sell our apples, our little figurines, so proud to acquire the flame pit and the roasting tongs to add to my family's economy. All citizens took part in the Assad, or one of the smaller satellite markets if one could not afford the stall rent demanded in the city center. To shirk one's duty to economy was a crime punishable by scalding irons applied to the arches of the feet. So it was that each morning the entire city, the city that mattered anyway, crowded under canopies to play out the grand procession of commerce. My apples were crisp between hundreds and hundreds of teeth. My jade and my onyx and garnet fetishes brought themselves thrice over in luck. Bears and snakes and spiders and storks, elephants and crows, and an endless grotesque variety of stars. I oiled my hair, the pride of my beauty, with the most expensive attar of emerald. A very intricate process to press oil from gems, but once in this place we knew how to do it. My scalp shone green and black. My neck was short, my thighs round. I was even a bit fat. Not an easy thing to avoid in the Assad, where any taste is answered by 12 more rarefied. I preferred date-stuffed serpents with a drizzle of rose gloss in my day. The juice of pepper-crusted dormice and honey-mashed snail shell, ground finer than diamond dust, ran down my sister's chins. Little songbirds basted in raspberry sugar and bees' wings made sticky my brother's fingers. In the fruit seller's quarter, pomegranate skins were packed with the tiniest of edible rubies, so small they melted on the tongue like cubes of sugar. Even more complex is the process by which foodstuff is made from the raw material of wealth, but we had mastered this too, in the days when we knew all things. Once I ate a topaz the size of my father's fist. Its skin split under my teeth like my own apples. The sun was so warm that day I thought it would shine through me. My father encouraged me gently, pushing the golden thing to my lips. It tasted of summer baked wheat and the palest of peaches. In the Assad, we ate everything we could buy, and we could buy anything. Nothing did not answer our hunger. Nothing did not have its price. I first heard of it during the third luncheon shift. The whole market could not cease, because we are inclined to be hungry in the middle of the day. We ate in shifts so that commerce never truly paused. That day I reclined on a red sofa beneath a violet canopy spangled with silver crescents, drinking spiced chocolate in a cup of plain gold. I was young then. I could not have expected more. A rind of citrine floated in my drink, and I prodded it with one long, frost-painted fingernail as the quince seller whispered, "Have you heard? It's all the way up to the Rukmini shops now." A particularly corpulent merchant, who had a few years earlier developed an astonishing and popular hybrid of plum and amethyst, yawned and slapped iridescent blue flies from his own cup. "So, they'll block off the street and we'll go about our business. Rukmini was a fishmonger's slum anyway, you old melon-wort. Pale and piecemeal shadow of the Assad. I call it a blessing. No more lifting one's pant leg to avoid the squid ink and ice-chunked cod blood." The plum breeder had taken to the latest fashion of grafting various extraneous limbs onto his body. His face was gray, contorting slowly into a small elephant's trunk which sloped over his mustache. He was quite proud of the infant appendage and made sure all in the Assad knew it would surely grow much larger by the end of the season. He was a man of considerable size, after all. "What's happened?" I asked, curious. I smoothed a shimmering strand of hair over my forehead. The heat pooled sweat and gem oil together, and a few green trickles warmed my neck. The quince cartwoman turned to me, her nose rings glittering. "It's gone," she said triumphantly. "The entire Rukmini. Second only to our goods is our command of gossip. And she had the upper hand in this other economy. Her short hair was slicked in garnet, and she never sweat." "Gone?" I was never a conversationalist. "Well," the plum breeder cut in, stroking his lazuli-coated mustache with his thumb and his fledgling trunk with his forefinger, "not entirely. There's bits of it left, blowing around, but I dare say no one will be bashing out octopus skulls in there any time soon." I must have gaped. Who would not have gaped? my agate-tattooed teeth, but one art in a city which contained all possible arts, showed behind my thick painted lips. I could see the plum breeder nakedly calculate whether my teeth trumped his trunk in the hierarchy of opulence, which shifted and slid with each new process, alchemy or mechanic, the Assad supplied. He seemed to decide his little grey appendage was safely superior. Why don't you go down Rookside and see for yourself? I'll have my boys watch your cart. They're honest as a skulk of foxes, which is to say not particularly, but they sell as well as they steal, and what more can anyone ask of the young? I frowned. True, they would steal, but his sons had quick tongues, and I was young enough to be curious about the city beyond the canopies, young enough to think the stinking alley full of empty crab claws and squabbling gulls flapping in off the river might be worth the loss of a few apples and knuckles of meat. I went. Who would not have gone? And that's where we'll stop for this week, and we will pick up with the Gem Eater next Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. I think that we have a few minutes before Instagram will kick me off, since these can only be an hour long. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask. Forgot to say the bit in the beginning. I always forgot that in the early days. Forgot to say the bit where you got to think of your questions while I'm reading, so that there's not an awkward gap while we wait for people to type in anything. But I'll try to remember that next time. It's a lot to remember every time. Applause because I don't have emotes. It's funny, in the YouTube archive, like, the feed doesn't come up, so I have to read things out loud so people know what I'm responding to later on. Somebody said it's good to be back. I'm glad that it's good. I missed you guys a lot. I missed all of this a lot. Do I know anything in particular that inspired Marrow? I always felt like there were things going on there that I missed. Well, as with the first book, I remember very little about writing this book. A little bit more than in the Night Garden, because I wrote this much more quickly, as I said, over the course of a year, rather than 3 or 4 years. And it's more recent. And I think I sort of knew more about writing by the time I got to this one. So I do remember some things. But I have a feeling that it's going to come to me as I read it, all of the stuff that went into Marrow, because a lot did. I definitely, without spoiling things, I definitely remember there was a moment where sort of the nature of Marrow popped into my head. It was very late at night. I had to wake people up to tell them that I'd figured out the plot. The Gem Eaters are sort of inspired by an Indian beastie, the Hungry Ghosts, and all of the sort of ruined city and the paper stuff. I think I've always been just sort of fascinated by other ways to build cities. You can find that in a lot of my books. And I part of fairy tales is this whole making well-known things out of uncanny objects. So you have glass shoes and glass coffins and all of these objects that are sort of made out of things they're not supposed to be made out of. So there's nothing more familiar than a city. So making cities out of things they're not supposed to be made out of is sort of automatically compelling, I think. But I will let you know as I go through what jumps into my head as having inspired things. There's a couple of references to purple and porphyry, which is a Byzantine thing. The emperor's sons, or the heirs, were said to be porphyrogenitos, I believe is the word, if I'm remembering my Greek correctly, which means born in the purple. Originally, it was supposed to mean that the heirs had been born in this special purple room, but it actually, people traveled around more than you think, so that was really inconvenient. So mothers used to just start having something made purple in their birthing room, and then after a while, it sort of trickled down to everybody. So having something purple in the room when you gave birth was considered wildly important, because then maybe they could be emperor one day if things went right. So there's a bunch of little references to sort of Byzantine culture in this as well. particularly this one has a lot of Byzantium in it, which is something that I studied in school and was very passionate about at the time, and had only just graduated / dropped out of graduate school. Graduated from undergrad, dropped out of graduate school. The paper feels like it means something. Always felt like it meant something. Well, it's a story. It's a city made out of a story. A ruined book, and a city that has been struck by calamity, as Mara was, is a ruined story. Every city is a story, and so yeah, it's definitely it is a very literal metaphor. But yeah, it's the ruination of a city's story. Anything else? I'll scroll up a little. Hi, SJ. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Big hug. If my arms are wide enough, I would hug everyone. It's really lovely to be back in this little space with you. Someday this will all be a distant memory, but I think that in my head, this sort of frame of the red and the gold and my fake flickering fire will sort of characterize this time for me. Yeah. I wish things were better for everyone and all of us. That's my Christmas wish. I just wish things were better for all of us. I wish none of this were happening. So do all men wish who live in such times, as a fellow with a big white beard once said. Well, I will do my outro stuff. If you have other questions, you can just pop them right up in the feed, and I will answer them when I'm done. As always, for legal purposes, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales and has never been. This is a play, a one-woman show. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can purchase copies of them from your local independent bookseller. Please do patronize them. Almost all of them have web portals at this point. You can still make orders from them directly and support their businesses during this ruination of a nation's story. If you would like to support my local independent bookseller, it is printbookstore.com. You can find me at Twitter, Cat Valente, and you can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valente as well. There's lots of good stuff, and one of the things that's up on my Patreon for free, you don't have to subscribe to it, is sort of my essay about all of the current events and the murder of George Floyd and everything that's happened in the last couple of weeks. So you can read that for free. You can catch up with all of these in the archive at YouTube, which is under Cat Valente Live, which is my YouTube channel. It'll take longer to upload this than the shorter ones, so it'll probably be live quite late tonight. And you can toss a coin to your witch if you are so moved. There's a tip jar in my Instagram profile, as well as my YouTube profile and my website, which is CatherynneMValente.com. You don't have to. This is entirely free from me to you, but things are still very, very shaky for freelancers and writers, and I am not an exception to that. I think few of us will be selling many books anytime soon. So anything that you would like to put in that jar, if you are moved to do so, is deeply appreciated, and I will thank you by name on the next stream, which will be next Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. As I said, we might move up to twice a week. It won't be more than twice a week, but we'll see. I think probably once a week feels okay right now. And that's all of the official business. I'm really grateful that you guys came back, and I hope that despite this, it sounds super heavy, and it is, but there's also a circus coming, a nice one, not like bone and gore circus, and I definitely remember a lot more about what the stuff that's behind the second half of this book, so I will remember as it goes along. I remember Seven and Oubliette, which is that little girl's name, and the coins. I remember where the coins came from. This is the Autumn and the Air book, so this is the one with the most horror elements, I think, to it. Also, now that I have a little boy, I'm like, no, poor Seven. I just can't. I'm sure I'll be able to write terrible things happening to small boys again in the future, but right now I couldn't possibly. So that's my little weakling heart. But yeah, here we go into the city of Marrow. They get out eventually, I promise. And you know what? We'll get out too, eventually. I promise. I love you all. I will see you next Sunday. Take care of yourselves and each other.